Greetings, Mr. Del Prado science students. It's Mr. Del here. We're going to continue on with cell transport today. So I'm hoping that if you remember from last week, we were talking about the cell membrane and the phospholipid bilayer and the proteins that are in the cell membrane. So the whole idea behind that is that the cell membrane, right, it allows us to take molecules in and out of the cell. So what we're going to do is just take a little deeper dive into see how do molecules get through that phospholipid bilayer, and how do bigger molecules utilize the transport proteins in there to get in and out of the cell. So when we look at these molecules, and if you look over at the pictures here, these are pictures that Mr. Doherty put in, which are interesting to look at. So the top picture, you can see there's like a rock that's like falling down a mountain, and it almost hits that car. It's actually terrifying when you look at it. That's an example. It's a metaphor that he's trying to use here for diffusion, in that the rock is rolling downhill. Okay, no energy is needed for that rock to roll down the hill. It's just gravity, and the rock is rolling down the hill to the point that it almost hits that car. And then if you look at the guy on the bottom there, you could see he's pushing a rock up a hill. And so the idea behind that is, well, if you're going up a hill, right, you're going to need energy. And again, that's just a metaphor. These aren't actual cells, obviously. This is just a metaphor that says, you know, when we push things uphill, we're going to use energy. When things are just rolling downhill, we don't use energy. So if we take these two pictures and we tie them back to the cell, there's two terms that I would like you to know. And one is called passive transport. And passive transport is when a cell, it essentially takes in molecules using no energy. And the reason that the cell can do that is because these molecules move essentially from high concentration to low concentration. And if that doesn't make sense to you, I don't know if I'd panic just yet, because I think the diagram will help you better understand how diffusion and passive transport works. Active transport is when we take molecules and we actively pump them into a cell. So you can think of something like a water pump. A water pump needs energy in order to pump water, right? That's electricity. So for your cell, for some molecules, it's going to use energy in the form of ATP to get those molecules in and out of the cell. So for those of you who are scared right now and think, well, I don't really understand what passive transport is, don't even look at the words here. Just look at the picture down below. If you look at the picture down below, we're going to imagine that this orange in the middle, and I think that's how it's depicted, is going to be a cell membrane. The little spheres here, we'll make them oxygen, okay? And we'll make this part the outside of the cell, and we'll make this part the inside of the cell. Now you might remember when we talked about oxygen, oxygen is one of those molecules that can diffuse right through the cell membrane. It's small enough that it will diffuse right through the membrane. And if you look at this picture here, you can see when the picture starts, there's more molecules on the left-hand side here, or outside of the cell. And there's less oxygen molecules on the inside of the cell. But what happens is, because of kinetic energy and the molecules like bouncing off one another, is that the molecules will tend to move from this side to this side until there's an equal amount of oxygen on both sides of the cell. And in fact, that's exactly what happens. This is called a molecule moving down its concentration gradient. All that means is it's a molecule that's moving from high concentration to low concentration. Okay, not every molecule does that, but we move until we get an equal amount of molecules on either side of the cell. And it turns out this is exactly how you get oxygen into your cell. It's also exactly how you get water into your cell. We can see the molecules moving from high concentration to low concentration. And once they are equal, then we say that the concentration or the cell is at equilibrium. Okay, so this is a type of passive diffusion, or excuse me, passive transport, and we call this type of passive transport diffusion, when molecules simply move right through the cell membrane until there's an equal amount on either side of the cell membrane. I hope that makes sense to you. If it doesn't, you can think about spraying some perfume into class. That perfume will diffuse all through class until it's equally distributed all around the class. That's another example of diffusion, going from high concentration in the perfume bottle to low concentration out in the classroom. Okay, so passive transport is when molecules move from high concentration to low concentration, and you don't need any energy. Going back to that picture, that's the rock moving down the hill for you students who like the metaphor. Active transport is when we pump molecules essentially from low concentration to high concentration. In order to do that, we're going to need cellular energy, and remember that energy is going to be in the form of ATP. Okay, so what we just talked about, oxygen, we also talked earlier about carbon dioxide and water. They get in and out of the cell through a process called simple diffusion. They just go from high concentration to low concentration until there's an equal amount of these molecules outside the cell and inside the cell. We threw this other one at you because we found it kind of fascinating. HGH, believe it or not, can actually do this as well. It can simply diffuse from the outside of your cell to the inside of your cell. This is called simple diffusion. So what is simple diffusion? It's the movement of molecules from high concentration to low concentration directly through the cell membrane. Okay, there are some other molecules that are too big to move through the cell membrane because they can't get through the phospholipid bilayer. And so what they will do is they will take protein channels and go through the cell membrane. They still go through diffusion from high concentration to low concentration, but they take essentially a different path into the cell. And that path is going to be in the form of channel proteins. And again, for my visual learners out there, take a look at this. Here's two molecules, okay, that both go into our cells through the process of facilitated diffusion. Okay, they're going from high concentration to low concentration, but neither of them can diffuse right through the cell membrane, so they have their very own special transport channel to go through. And you can see that each transport channel has a unique shape to allow the molecule to go through. Why do we care about this? Because maybe, I think, one of the most important non-water molecules in biology is glucose, right? Essentially the food that we eat. This diffuses into your cells, but it has to go through a very special transport protein. But that's how we get food into our cells. So what is facilitated diffusion? It's diffusion. It's the movement of molecules from high concentration to low concentration. Okay, but they have to go through a very special channel protein, and that channel protein is arranged just so it can fit a specific molecule through it so that the cell can take in that molecule and then use it for whatever the cell is going to use it for. So that's it. The big picture today, what I'd like you to walk out with is know the difference between diffusion and active transport. I also would like you to know the difference between simple diffusion, which is going through the cell membrane, and facilitated diffusion, which is diffusion but going through a membrane protein. So there you have it, 8 minutes and 50 seconds. We're close to it, and you're done with your cell transport for the day. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys soon.